There are 3 books over there. There's 3 books over there. There are 2 pens in the drawer. There's 2 pens in the drawer. I think a lot of times we put a lot of pressure on ourselves when we're learning a second language to speak perfectly and use perfect grammar, when the reality is that in every language, native speakers kind of play with the language sometimes, and there are mistakes that we make intentionally and unintentionally. Today I want to chat with you about grammar mistakes that even native speakers often make in English. So let's go through some specific ones that are very common in the United States. The first one is the use of you versus me. A lot of native English speakers tend to mix these up, especially in fast-paced conversation. So for example, a grammatically correct sentence would be something like, Leo and I are going to the beach today. Leo and I are going to the beach today. But a lot of times what you'll actually hear people say is something more like, Leo and me are going to the beach today. Leo and me are going to the beach today. And so we'll mix up our first person singular subject and object pronouns. Another very common mistake is mixing up theirs from there is versus there are. This is probably the mistake that I make the most, I think every single day of my life. So technically, when we're referring to something that is a plural, we should use there are, right? For example, there are 3 books over there. Or there are 2 pens in the drawer. But a lot of times what you'll actually hear native speakers say is something more like, there's 3 books over there. There's 3 books over there. Or there's 2 pens in the drawer. There's 2 pens in the drawer. Now this is probably just because of how easy it is to say theirs instead of there are or there're. The next one is mixing up the words well and good. So technically, if someone asks you, how are you? You should respond with, I am well. I am well. That adverb well is describing the verb are. I'm talking about how I am or are. So I am well. But almost always you'll hear people say something more like, I'm good. I'm good. That sounds much more conversational and natural. And actually, if you say, I am well, you sound a little bit formal or kind of fancy. So even though good is technically incorrect grammatically, it's what you'll hear most of the time. Now, the next one actually has to do a bit more with writing, but it comes from what we hear. So this is when we replace should have with should of. So for example, if I wanted to say something like, I should have studied for the test. A lot of times what you'll see even native speakers do when they're writing is they'll write, I should of, O-F. I should have studied for the test. Now, you might be able to figure out why this happens. It's because when we say should have in fast speech, it sounds more like should have, should have. And native speakers will hear should have and write down should of instead of should have, or the abbreviated should apostrophe VE, which would represent should have. The next one is mixing up your, that comes from you are, versus the possessive your. Again, this one has to do more with spelling and writing than speech, but you can probably tell how it's been influenced by speech. So if I ask you a question like, what time is your appointment? What time is your appointment? That your is possessive, right? It's referring to the appointment that belongs to you, right? What time is your appointment? So this should be written without the apostrophe there. It should just be Y-O-U-R. What time is your appointment? The appointment that belongs to you. But you'll find that a lot of times native speakers will mix up the you are, your, versus possessive your. And so they would write something like, what time is your Y-O-U apostrophe R-E appointment? Or the opposite might happen as well. For example, if I say something like, you're from Michigan, aren't you? You're from Michigan, aren't you? Now here, that your is actually representing you are. You are from Michigan, aren't you? Right? But you'll often find that native speakers will mix this one up too, and they'll write Y-O-U-R. Now this mistake is very common, but it's very frowned upon. So a lot of times you'll see native speakers making fun of other native speakers because they used the wrong your. And another very similar mistake is it's with an apostrophe representing it is versus the possessive it's. So for example, it's next to the chair, that should be written with the apostrophe, right? Because it's representing it is. It is next to the chair. Or the cheese is past its expiration date. Past its expiration date. It's now is possessive. It's the expiration date belonging to the cheese, right? So here you should not have an apostrophe. But a lot of times native speakers will flip-flop these. Another very common mistake is mixing up everyday written as one word versus everyday written as two words. So if I write everyday as a single word, that means that something is common or ordinary. So for example, oh, these are my everyday jeans, meaning they're not my fancy jeans, they're just my common ordinary jeans. But everyday written as two words means daily. I'm referring specifically to something happening each and every single day. So if I say something like, I exercise every day, that every day should be two separate words. Can you think of any examples of common mistakes that native speakers in your language make? Share here in the comments below. If you're into advanced English, don't forget to subscribe here below because Inglés na Hora is all about advanced English.